Here again tonight. We're glad you came back. If you haven't come before, we're glad you're here. We're going to cover basics of leadership development in this first session. Talk about commitment, involvement, spiritual growth, and desire. And we'll expound on those a little bit. This section is a little bit longer than the next one as far as my material goes, so we'll cut it off on time and get ourselves about a 10-minute break, even if we don't finish this section, because I think I can finish it up at the start of the next session and then still finish the material for the second session about on time for us there. So we won't have to miss anything, and I don't think we'll be running over any. This first section is kind of a continuation of some general foundational information we're going to talk about, and we'll start to get into the specifics more of leadership development and leadership in the second session tonight, and then the 3 sessions tomorrow morning. And then, as you know, after lunch, and we've allowed an hour for lunch, but it's going to be a boxed lunch, so I'm sure it won't take that long. So if we can get started a little earlier than 1 o'clock tomorrow, I think that's good, because we're going to do some case studies. We're going to break up into groups and give you each a different case study to look at and analyze, come up with some what the situation is that you're dealing with, what scriptures would apply to that situation, what actions or decisions you would make as an eldership for that situation, and then we'll have you pick one of your group to present your solution, if you will, to that particular case study to the group in a maybe 5 minutes or so, and why you did or decided what needed to be done for that situation. And if you've had a chance to look at any of the case studies in the back, there's some very interesting situations that they sent me, and that's just the tip of the iceberg for what he's gathered in his book. And his book only has 100, and I know he has over 200 because he told me he had over 200 case studies to choose from. So I think that'll be very interesting, and I think it'll be challenging. I've looked at those, the 4 we're going to pick out, and I think you'll enjoy the challenge of. And these are not anything that Glenn just dreamed up out of his head. These are actual things situations that elderships have had to deal with. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to start off with a quiz. What's 12,000 represent? It's roughly the number of congregations we have in the United States. That's obviously, that figure changes almost daily, but that's roughly the number of congregations we have in the United States. What's 6,000 represent? Number of congregations that have elderships. 50% of our congregation in the United States do not have elderships. They are not scripturally organized. You know what 3,000 is?
Almost the number that was saved on the day of Pentecost.
Sound congregation.
That's it, but that's not that answer. But you're right. But
Sound congregations that follow God.
That's a good answer, but that's not it either. That's the number of congregations, according to Flavio Yeakley in his studies recently. That's the number of congregations that have 2 elders. No more than 2 elders. All right. Now, why is that interesting or important? Or one heartbeat away, as we say, isn't it? One heartbeat away from an eldership.
You have a stalemate on it.
Okay. You have the potential for that. That's right. That's right. Of course, you could have that with 2, 4, 6, 8, or 12, or any even number. Let me ask you a question. I would start off with this. We understand what God's will is for the organization of Lord's Church, don't we? I think that's about as clear as it can be. If that's the case, why do half our congregations in the United States not have elderships?
Don't train them.
Sorry?
Train the younger people.
Okay, that's certainly a reason.
Too many people shun responsibility.
Too many people shun responsibility. Okay, I think that's another reason. Tell you something, I was I was baptized in 1978 when I was dating my wife, and her family and her mother lived in Huntington, Tennessee. I don't know if any of you know where that is. It's near Jackson. So we went up there to visit her mother. I was not a member of the church at the time. And if you're familiar with Route 22 that runs due north off of I-40, runs straight into Huntington. So we were coming up from Atlanta, and we got off I-40, and we're going due north about 20 or 30 miles up Route 22. It's a 4-lane highway. And I noticed every 3 or 4 miles on that road, it's farm country out there. Every 3 or 4 miles we'd have a traffic light, and there'd be a little town. And there'd be this little red brick building sitting there on the road that said Church of Christ on it. It might hold 40 or 50 people by the size of it. And we go 3 or 4 more miles to another red light, another small town, and there'd be that red brick building sitting there. Another Church of Christ. This went on 5 or 6 buildings within 20 miles. Well, my wife didn't pay attention to it. She was from that area, but it struck me as odd because they were all about the same size. They were all these little red brick buildings. So I asked her, I said, why are these churches 3 or 4 miles apart in these small buildings that can't hold more than 30 or 40 people? She said, why are they all worshiping separately? My wife was raised in a church, so she didn't understand the question. She gave me an odd look, and I said, why don't they combine? You know, these people can't support a preacher full time, these little 30 or 40 member congregations. They really don't have, I'm sure they don't have much contribution to do much, evangelism or benevolence. Why don't they combine? And my wife looked at me and had this odd look on her face, and you know what she said? They don't want to. She thought it was a stupid question. That's why they don't want to.
One probably in music, playing the one cup.
Possibly. But I think it's more of a mindset about that. But what they're satisfied with not being scripturally organized. And I think that's we're going to look at a couple of reasons for that. I think that's I don't think part of it is that people lack an understanding of the importance of being organized in accordance with God's will. That it's the most effective, efficient way to have oversight over a congregation of the Lord's people. I think oftentimes they lack the tools to prepare men for leadership. And that's one of the reasons that inspired me to write this book, is what I saw in West Georgia. That even though they had 2 or 3 elders, I saw the same kind of situation that I talked about last night, where it was very difficult to get them to start training men, deacons or otherwise, for leadership roles. They just didn't see the importance in it until it was too late. When one died, one moved away, and they were without an eldership for an extended period of time. I think there's a certain amount of selfishness in that, I think, at times, for not having an eldership. Because every man gets, if you have a men's business meeting, every man gets a vote, doesn't he? He has authority but no responsibility, or very little responsibility, but his vote counts as much as anybody else's. I think that's part of the reason also. We talked about it last night, about the comfort zone that men get into when they are over an extended period of time, if they're dealing with an unscriptural men's business meeting. They get comfortable with that without having to step up and take responsibility, and the congregation looking to them for leadership and responsibility. So I think those are some of the major reasons that we see this situation exists, and it's not a good one. How do we combat that? How do we deal with that situation in the church? I think Matthew 25, 14 to 30, the parable of talents. How would that relate to our situation with leadership in the church? God expects us to use our talents, doesn't He? And that's not happening if we're not. And I understand that there are congregations that are too small, don't have qualified men, or may not have any men at all. I understand. That's not what I'm talking about. But obviously, the vast majority of these congregations could have qualified men if they wanted them, if they wanted to step up and do that. And God expects us to do what with our talents?
And grow them.
Use them and grow them. That's right. Use them and grow our talents. We're to grow and mature as Christians, especially the men, okay? We have responsibilities to lead our congregations, and we have to take that seriously. Are we going to be held accountable for our growth or lack thereof? Revelations 20, verse 12. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged by it, by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. We've got to be active, don't we? We have to get things accomplished, is what we're expected to do in the Lord's church, and that's certainly true when it comes to leadership. What obligation do we have in developing effective leaders? Hebrews 11, verses 39 and 40. And don't we have a personal responsibility, each one of us in the church, each man in the church, to develop himself to his maximum capabilities? And certainly as far as that leadership goes, and you can certainly be a leader in the church without being a deacon or an elder. In a sense, you can be a leadership by example. But we're talking about here the responsibility to develop our talents to the highest level of productivity that we can in the church. To be all we can be for God. Isn't that what God expects of us? On a personal level and also on a corporate level. And I use that term corporate to mean as a congregational level or as the eldership needs to develop those talents. We have a responsibility to do that. Hebrews 11, 39 and 40. And all these, though commended through their faith, and who's the Hebrew writer referring to there when he says all these? I'm sorry?
I call it the Hall of Fame faith.
Okay, the Hall of Fame faith. Name a couple of them just to give us an idea. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that's who he's referring to, Hebrew writer is referring to there. He said, all of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. What are they talking about there?
The promised rest.
The promise. The Christ, the gospel. They were promised that. We know Abraham said, God told Abraham what? Through your seed, all nations will be blessed. Okay? Obviously referring to Christ and His sacrifice. But did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us. And that better was what? The gospel, Christ. That apart from us, they should not be made perfect. What's the Hebrew writer's point here with those two verses? What's he telling us?
Faith in the Old Testament saints were looking forward to something better. It was way far off. We're experiencing that now. And we better take advantage of it because they could.
That's right. That's exactly right. The law of Christ is called what? A better covenant, isn't it? With better promises. Along with that better covenant and better promises comes what for us? Comes along with that for us.
Forgiveness of sin and salvation.
Responsibility. Comes more responsibility. Better covenant, better promises, more responsibility we have. Are we not, in a sense, standing on the shoulders of those men?
Yes.
In other words, we what? We owe it to them. We owe it to them. Point be made there. We have more responsibilities. And as men, we, men of the church, are not stepping up in the way we should. All right, let's start talking about these four basics of leadership development. Commitment. It all starts there. Definition of commitment, an agreement or pledge to do something in the future. The state of being obligated. Okay? We are obligated. We know that. Choosing whom we will serve. Matthew 24:33 and Luke 14:33. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one or love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money, or God and mammon. We all know Matthew 6:33, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Luke, so therefore any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. You've heard the expression, some people try to live with one foot in the world and one foot in the church. What do they say in Revelations about those kind of folks? They call them what? Lukewarm. They call them lukewarm. And what's going to happen to them? Christ's going to spew them out of his mouth, isn't he? He's going to spit them out. Okay? That's what we have. We have people, too many of us, that try to live double lives, don't we? We don't put God first all the time. When it says renounce all that he has, and we know he's not talking about giving up our family and our job and those type things. It's a matter of it's a relative matter. That we renounce anything that we don't put first. We put first the church, and everything else falls behind that. Family. And that's why if you want to become a leader in the church, you want to become an elder in the church, then your family, especially your wife, needs to understand the responsibilities of that and be fully supportive of that, because there will be a sacrifice of time and attention to the family at times when the church comes before family and those responsibilities. And it has to be a united effort. The job is challenging enough without the family and especially the wife behind you in that. I remember something, Brandy was 18, I think, when they asked me to be an elder. And my wife had reservations about that, about the stress it was going to put on our family and on our relationship. And she had concerns about that, and we had a struggle for that for a while. So I finally, and I was ready at the time to step up to do that. And so finally I just called in Brandy and her sister. She was 15, I think, or 16, Jessica, and I called them into the kitchen, and we explained the situation to them. And I said, girls, what do you think? You know, you're part of the family. This is going to be a family effort. And my time's going to be taken away from you two also. And Brandy said, Mama, if you don't let Daddy be an elder, he said, he's not going to be fit to live with. Okay, that's how bad he wants to do this. She said, we got to let him do this, and we got to support him. And that's it. My wife's concerns melted, and your younger sister said, absolutely. So, we went into it with the entire family in support of that, and it was a blessing, I think, for all of us. Attitude towards God's Word. John 14:15 and 1 John 5:3. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. I often use this. Now I am in Missouri, so I can use it again. But I often say reference. What's the motto for Missouri? Yeah, it's the show me state, isn't it? Okay, and I think about that. Love is a demonstratable emotion. What's that old joke about the guy that said, I told my wife, I loved her when I got married, and I'll let her know if that changes. She doesn't need to hear it anymore. If anything changes, I'll let her know. That's not going to get it, is it, fellas? That's not going to get it. Love is a demonstratable emotion. You can tell me all you want about what your relationship is with me, but if I don't see it in you and your actions, and it's the same way with our love for the Lord, we have to that has to be shown, that has to be demonstrated. Why is it not? Why are his commandments not? Why would that scripture say his commandments are not burdensome?
Because we will want to do it.
we will want to do it. We will want to do it.
More importantly, you have to understand that it's goodness of the Lord to follow His commandments. You're going to benefit from doing what's right in the Lord.
Okay. Okay. That's absolutely right. It's all about attitude, isn't it? It's all about our attitude. If we get our attitude straight, if somebody says, well, why do you go back on Sunday nights? I mean, there's no scripture about that. I mean, you went Sunday morning, and why do you need to go Sunday night? And my thought on that, once I got my mind wrapped around this love for God, I thought, where else would I want to be? Where else is more important to me than being with members of the church worshiping God? I don't understand the question. Where else would I want to be?
It's the Lord's day.
That's right, it's the Lord's day. Where else would you want to be? If you have that if you understand the sacrifice that was made, if you understand grace and what was done for us, and that we appropriated the righteousness of God, Isaiah 61:10, that robe of God's righteousness was wrapped around us at our conversion. We shouldn't have any problem with serving God, should we? We shouldn't have any problem. It should be our attitude. What Joshua say in Joshua 24:15, one of my favorite verses.
That's for me and my house. Choose.
That's right.
But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
He said, if you want to go serve the pagans, if you want to do this and that, you know what, you make that choice. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord.
You know what America's struggling with right now? You can serve whatever you want to serve. You go out and worship a tree in the front yard. But America was built on the foundation of God.
It was. It was. Okay, let's talk about self-examination. We talked about 2 Corinthians 13:5. Examine ourselves to see if we're in the faith. And this is something, and you certainly don't have to wouldn't make this public, but this is for your own reflection and meditation. What is my vision for West End? For the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Where do you...
Train men to be elders and deacons.
I'm talking about the congregation now. I'm talking about congregationally. Have you thought about where you want this congregation to be in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? What do you want to see this congregation become or be involved in? Okay? That's it. That's on personal level. You think about that, and I want this to be personal because the next questions are going to get more personal. Okay? You take that vision, and I would expect elderships to do that same thing for the congregation on a corporate level. Where do we want this congregation to be a year from now or 3 years from now? What do we want to be involved in? What do we want to improve in this congregation? Let's visualize that.
Missionary work.
Okay, well, it could be anything. What do you want to do? You have to make that determination because in order to get something accomplished, no, not you, I'm talking about the congregation. But we each have on a personal level, where do you want to be in your spirituality a year from now, or 3 years from now, or 5 years from now?
Grow as a Christian.
Okay. But that's, the problem with that is that's vague. Okay? It's difficult to milestone out and plan to accomplish something unless you have a definitive, concrete, specific goal set. But it starts with a vision, personally, okay, and corporately. And if the elders have a vision, should have a vision for what they want this congregation to be in the future in different time frames. And then they have to translate that, communicate that vision to the membership. Here's what we want. Here's where we see this congregation 1 year, 3 years, 5 years from now. And then they have to develop plans to reach that vision, to turn that vision into reality. Because you're not going to wake up one day a year or 3 years from now and suddenly your vision has been answered. That's not going to happen, is it? That's not how life works. Whether it's your family, your career, or the church. We have to plan the work and work the plan, okay? And we'll talk about more about that as we get into tonight. The next question, what part will I play in reaching our goals? If the elders lay out a vision and where they want to be the next few years, then each of us as members of a congregation have to say to ourselves, or should say to ourselves, what part am I going to play in reaching those goals or making that vision a reality? How can I participate in reaching those goals? Examine ourselves. How do I find my place in this congregation's growth and vision? What are my talents? What are my interests? What's my experience? How can I improve myself that I can be part of that solution? I had a boss years ago and she was strict. Oh my goodness, was she strict. And if she got any pushback from us, she'd say, now you can either be part of the solution or you're part of the problem. Which one you're going to which one's it going to be? Okay? Get on board or get out. Okay? We want ourselves to be part of the solution. Next, am I satisfied with my level of service at West End? Am I satisfied with my level of service? Now, you may well be. But if not, why not?
I don't think we should ever be satisfied.
Okay.
You are, you're not growing.
If not, why not? And if you're not satisfied, now what? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about your level of service? Yes, sir.
Is this in relationship to this goal that you set, or broader term?
I think it can be both. I think it can be both. That your level of service is how you're serving or how much you're serving. Is that positively contributing to the vision for the congregation? You know, that's something you have to be honest with yourself about. And it's not necessarily a time thing, is it? It can be not necessarily quality, but quantity, but quality. You know, am I given? Am I fully engaged? Am I committed to serving this congregation in whatever capacity I can serve and be most productive in, be of most benefit to God's plan? Because to me, Luke 19:10 is a big umbrella over the church, and it says what? Christ came here to seek and save the lost, and that's the umbrella that the church sits under. Whether it's benevolence or edification or evangelism, it falls under that. We seek and save the lost. That's the umbrella we fall under. Okay. Next, do I understand and believe? Oh, excuse me, I skipped one. Am I satisfied with my rate of spiritual growth? First of all, am I growing spiritually? And if I am I satisfied with the rate of my growth? And if you're not, what are you going to do about it? You know, I think it's not rocket science how to grow spiritually, is it? What are some things we can do to grow spiritually? Pray, absolutely, pray. Study. Study the Bible, obviously, but there's other. You know, there are commentaries and writings by scholars that can help us to grow. Certainly, study and prayer, fellowship. You grow through fellowship? I hope so. I hope so. You be a doer of the work. You got to be involved, don't you?
Can't be a bystander.
Okay, we'll talk about that. Plan to be all you can be. I look at these as personal challenges for each of us, and the eldership certainly has a challenge to develop that for the congregation and encourage that for the congregation, to set an example for the congregation in that. Okay, let's talk about involvement. This is a definition, and I take absolutely no credit for this, but it's the best definition I've heard. It was from a gentleman that spoke at the Freed-Hardeman Lectureships 20-some years ago, and I wrote it down as fast as he said it, and I have yet to find a better one. Involvement, becoming fruitful, which simply means what? Becoming productive and fulfilled. Otherwise, reaching our potential. We feel fulfilled in what we're doing. Becoming fruitful and fulfilled in meaningful areas of service. Not wasteful time where we're not accomplishing anything. Becoming fruitful and fulfilled in meaningful areas of service. Going beyond membership to ministry. What does that mean? Going beyond membership to ministry. You know, that's exactly what I think I have written here. Warming a pew. Membership. Showing up. Going beyond showing up. Okay? And warming a seat. What do we mean by ministry?
Serving.
Reaching out to others.
Serving. Active. Be involved. Accomplish something. And whatever ministry excites you, involves you, where your talents lie, where you're needed by the eldership. Overcoming inertia. Definition of inertia is something at rest tends to stay at rest. I substitute people for something. People at rest tend to what? In the church. Tend to stay at rest, don't they? People at rest in the church tend to stay at rest. That's why we have the 80-20 problem in probably most of our congregations, isn't it? And for those of you that may not know what that means, it simply means that 80% of the work's done by 20% of the membership. And that's probably true, or close to being true, in most congregations. Okay? And we'll talk about that just a minute. I'll do another statistic I saw, and you can think about this, and it'd be easy to do if you look at the directory. I think it was Flavel Yeakley again, found that, what do you think, if you serve generally in the Church of Christ, in congregations, the percentage of adult members, capable adult members, that are actively involved in at least one ministry? What do you think the average is in the Church of Christ? Actively involved in just one ministry, capable adults. And by active, I mean involved beyond Sunday and Wednesday night. 10%? 2%? Close. 25%. 25%. 1 out of 4 adults are actively involved in one ministry. Is that shameful? We were at Forest Park when I first saw that statistic. I pulled out our directory, and we sat down, the 4 or 5 elders, and I said, let's just go down this real quick and see kind of ballpark where we are. We were at 50%, double the average. And we felt good about that for about 5 minutes. I said, we've got half our capable adults in this congregation that cannot or will not be actively involved in just one ministry. We got an attitude problem, don't we? And I guess it's always been there a long time, but that doesn't make it right, does it? We got to get folks involved, and we'll talk about some ways we can do that. Christ's example, we're talking about involvement now. We'll look at some scriptures. John 13:12-17 and Mark 10:42-45. I'll read through these quickly. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garment and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, you are right, so I am. And if I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should also do just as I have done to you. Truly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things." If is what type of word? It's a conditional word, isn't it? If, on the condition that you know these things, if you know these things, blessed are you, on the condition that you do what? That you do them. Not just know them, that you do them. Action. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of Gentiles lord over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them, but it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever must be first among you must be your slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to serve, not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Spiritual blessings. James 1:22-25. And I'll paraphrase that because I think we all know it. Be doers of the word, not hearers only. Being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. Okay. And I think about the priests and the demons who believed, didn't they? Demons really believed, didn't they? Because they what? They trembled at the thought, didn't they? Were they saved? Why not? They believed.
Obedient to the word.
It was not an obedient faith. The priest would not make it known public. Why? They didn't want to get thrown out of the temple, did they? It was more important to them to be part of that priest group than it was to publicly identify. They did not have an obedient faith.
Scripture for that is many of the chief priests believed in Christ, but did not confess him, for they feared Pharisees.
Because they were afraid of being thrown out of the temple, right? That's right. Priority problem. All right, let's talk about for a minute about one of my least favorite words in the church. Volunteer. What's the major difference between a volunteer and a servant?
Same thing as a hired hand in the air. The servant loves the Lord and is going to do what's right before
Okay.
God because it serves him with joy to do so.
Okay, but I'm talking about generically right now, not.
Volunteer is just somebody there just because you asked them to be there. They may not want to be.
I see the major difference is very simple. It's about who's in charge. That's the difference between a volunteer and a servant. It's about who's in charge. If you volunteer for something, who's in charge? You are. If you choose not to do what you're involved in, you just walk away, right?
But then you should be obligated to fulfill it.
The volunteer. Okay.
If you volunteer.
You should.